Well, Happy New Year, and welcome back to all of you. I had a delightful break. I hope that you did as well. I hope, unlike me, you were able to take your mind off impeachment. I found myself spending a lot of time on impeachment, and today's kind of a summary of my thoughts. And I want you to know that this is a culmination of lots of conversations back home over the break with good friends, with relatives, with constituents. This is a culmination of phone calls that I've taken here in the office. Just all of my thoughts kind of combined together, and me trying to make sense out of it, and hopefully you'll find this helpful as well. You'll see behind me, I'm going to use something that I haven't done before, but that's a computer and some graphics, because I want to try to explain this in the best possible way. And I've broken impeachment up into these different groups that you'll see here behind me. And I want to give them all kind of a name, and I hope you'll see that I'm having a little bit of fun with the names and don't take them too seriously. The first group that I've identified of people, the way they view impeachment, is called IPD1. What does that mean? That means impeachment from day one. And I'll go in a minute and explain the characteristics of these, but that's our first group. The next group, and you'll see here, these two groups are actually relatively similar in size. The way these are broken out in size is very unscientific. It's my office and me kind of coming together and saying, we think there's about this many people in each of these categories. But this next group we called NW. What does that stand for? Nothing wrong. The president has done nothing wrong. The third group up here you'll see is actually smaller than these first two groups, but also pretty significant. It's called IDSI. What does that stand for? I don't see it. The next group, also similar in size to the I don't see it group, is the SPMP group, some price must be paid group. And the final group that my staff, from being home over the holidays, comes back and tells me is the very largest group, is the IDK or IDC group, I don't care, or I don't know group. And that's how these groups are made up. So we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of each of these groups, but there are a couple of things that I want to make really clear. Why does this matter? Because we're talking past each other. Being back home, I just realized I sit down with people that I just have immense respect for. I think they have respect for me, and we're just not connecting. And I think these characteristics and what we're going to lay out today will help us connect and better understand the way that each of us are viewing this. It's also important to realize that I'm stereotyping people, and I don't mean to do that. You'll find yourself in some of these categories with some characteristics and not in the others. And this is a generalization, and really very few people actually fit in 100% in each one of these boxes. And again, they're stereotypes, and so take it for what it's worth. I want to talk about two of these groups right now, and then we'll go down and talk about each one individually. These two are diametrically opposed. Yet they share the exact same characteristics. What is that? So we've got the impeach from day one group. You all know who they are. You've seen them. Before President Trump was even elected, they were calling for impeachment. And we've got the nothing wrong group. You know who these folks are too. You've seen those. No matter what he does, and to use his famous quote, he could shoot somebody in the middle of the street and he could have done nothing wrong. What's interesting about these two groups is the characteristics that they share. This is where the media focuses. They don't focus on the other groups. They focus really primarily on these, which makes us think that it's everybody on the opposite side of us is in this group. Nothing will change their mind. No witnesses, no document, no evidence will change their mind on either one of these groups. And that's a characteristic that I think that we've all seen, and primarily here again on the media. That's what the media is showing us. And these are the some price must be paid group and the I don't see it group. Now, like the two previous groups, these two are very, very different, but they share a common characteristic, and that is both of them are fundamentally basing their position on what is best for the future. Now, they get there in two very, very different ways, but that's what's most concerning to them. In the some price must be paid category, they're worried that if a price is not paid, future presidents will be able to get away with bad behavior. Not just President Trump, but any president will be able to get away with bad behavior if we let this precedent go unpunished. In the I don't see it category, and this is where I find myself, you'll clearly see my bias throughout this video, is that we're worried that a rushed, a partisan, an unfair process could weaponize impeachment, and that we would then see this used too commonly, and something that should be of great gravity and of great weight becomes commonplace. And that's the worry that this group sees for the future. Now, there's some other characteristics that I think are just super important as well. And by the way, one last thought on that last slide, let me go just back a little bit. One of the problems for both of these groups is that the decision before us is an all or nothing. And what I mean by that, it's impeach or not impeach. It isn't punish a little bit, punish a lot. And many in this some price must be paid group that I've talked to, and we saw this actually in the national media, would be okay with the censure instead of impeachment. But because that option is not available to them, they go all the way for impeachment. Now, the opposite is this group, who may also be willing to go along, I can't speak for everybody, with some level of discipline or censure, but because it's impeachment or nothing, they can't go to impeachment. I can't go to impeachment, if that makes sense. So another really interesting characteristic of the some price must be paid group that's very different than the other group is there's somehow a sense that the combined actions should be considered, not a single action. That the racist comments and some of the other bad behavior that's been perceived by President Trump all should go into this formula. And the people that I talk to who are in this group have a really hard time separating that out, as opposed to the I don't see it group who is looking for a clearly defined impeachable offense. And remember, what I had an opportunity to vote on was a clearly defined impeachable offense. The Democrats wrote 2 articles of impeachment. They didn't go back and cover all the bad behavior. They didn't cover all the things that so many people don't like about President Trump. And so those of us in this group, the I don't see it group, are saying, wait a minute, no, I have to see a clearly defined impeachable offense in and of itself that's impeachable. And this group over here is saying, boy, that comes together maybe from one event, but also from all of these things that have been added to it. Now, another characteristic that it took me a while to get my arms around this, but I think I finally understand why the SPM group feels the way that they do, is I'm coming, and this group, I don't see it group, is coming from a position where our traditional court system is very, very important, and the practices that we follow there, innocent until proven guilty, and all of these things should be the same standard that we're using for impeachment. And I found by talking to this group that they don't necessarily accept that impeachment has its own rules and it doesn't have to follow the traditional court system. And a really good example of that is our standard of proof. We see in some cases, for instance, getting a search warrant, that a judge wants to see some evidence that there's a reason for a search warrant, and the bar is very, very low to get that. On the other hand, if we're going to try a convict a murderer, we want evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And so those of us in this group right here are looking for evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, while this group over here is looking for, is it reasonable to believe? And this comes out very strongly, and I had a really strong conversation about that this last week at Christmas, is that we all have the transcript of the tape, so we know what the president said. What we don't know was what his intent was. And so if you're looking for this standard of reasonable to believe, you very quickly go to influence the 2020 election. If you're in this group here, beyond reasonable doubt, you want evidence that that was his intent. And this is a major, major difference between these two groups. If you've hung in there with me this long, thank you. I'm getting very close to the end. I hope you've found this helpful. It's been very helpful for me to analyze it this way. This last group that we're going to look at is the I don't know and I don't care. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what people are doing. I don't know what's going on in Washington. And they kind of fall into 2 different categories. The I don't care tends to feel like this is all baked. The outcome is already known. Why should I be paying attention when we already know what's going to happen over in the Senate? And I have to admit that there's some real truth to that skepticism, and it's warranted. The I don't know group is an interesting group, and I think we all have to admit that we've all learned things about impeachment that we didn't know before. I didn't personally know that Nancy Pelosi had to send the articles of impeachment over to the Senate and that she may hold those back. That was quite a surprise to me. Everybody in our office is continuing learning. Well, and if we're learning here in the office, imagine the average person on the street. trying to wade through what's going on, what the different agendas are, what the different rules are. And you can see that this is a very, very broad category and possibly actually growing. Well, the final slide that I have here is what's next and where are we going. And I find a little irony here in that if you remember our two groups of some price must be paid and I don't see it, they're almost actually flipping roles a little bit as this goes to the Senate. And so what do I mean by that? The people who didn't care a lot about the formality of the trial, the rules of the trial, and just felt like that shouldn't matter, are now demanding that same thing in the Senate. And of course, the other side's flipping a little bit too and saying, well, the side that cared all about this formality is actually saying, no, let's just get this thing over with. I'll tell you my personal belief, and I feel strongly about this. The Senate should conduct a trial much like a court trial. American people and the senators who have to make this decision should have information that I didn't have when I made my decision. And I'm hoping the Senate puts together something that will put this to bed for Americans and let them move on once and for all. Every time I do one of these, I think it might be the last one I do, so I'm going to tell you this is the last one I do, and then I'm quite sure I'll be back with another soon. Thank you.